Convenzámonos todos, si es que alguien tiene alguna duda, ciudadanos y soldados, soldados y ciudadanos, el capitalismo es la causa, la verdadera causa de la miseria, de la desigualdad y de la...
Dios me la bendiga y sigamos avanzando por el camino siempre de la revolución bolivariana. Y recuerden que pase lo que pase, nosotros venceremos, nosotros.
¡Vencido! ¡El pueblo presente! ¡Aquí el presidente! ¡El pueblo!
Yo llamo a la vida misma, dulce y buena camarada.
¡Alerta! ¡Alerta! ¡Alerta que camina! ¡La espada de Bolívar por América Latina! Tribuna abierta acá. Camarada, aquí está Socorro Hernández.
Mi nombre es Verónica Hernández y bueno, aquí estamos protestando la liberación de nuestro presidente Nicolás Maduro y la primera combatiente Silvia Flores, quienes nos arrebataron ilegalmente.
Jenny Cadenas, mi impresión es de indignación.
La guerra es cognitiva porque la guerra es por el cerebro. El cerebro maneja emociones y maneja conceptos. La guerra es cognitiva. ¿Ves? Y para una guerra cognitiva hay que crear.
Pero es obvio porque se trata de eso. Pero lo ha dicho Trump, o sea, eso hay que reconocerle. Ni siquiera guarda las apariencias, ni siquiera guarda la forma. Lo ha dicho, ¿no? Queremos el petróleo de Venezuela, que nos devuelvan el petróleo, que nos quitaron. El petróleo se nació.
La mujer, que es el baluarte principal, que es la vanguardia, hoy sale a las calles a decirle al mundo y a exigirle al imperialismo norteamericano que nos regrese a Nicolás Maduro y a Silvia Flores, que se lo llevaron.
Cuba y Venezuela, una sola bandera.
¿Usted cree que lo que sucedió en Venezuela pueda suceder aquí en Cuba también?
La amenaza del gobierno de los Estados Unidos es una amenaza para todos los países del mundo.
They've made it clear. Marco Rubio said first Venezuela, then Cuba, then Nicaragua. They are targeting Venezuela to go for the entire region.
My family's from Gaza. We see the ways in which both actors like Netanyahu and Trump work side by side to continue to promote imperialist foreign agenda and continue to try to squash movements for liberation all over the world.
Los cubanos hemos sido uno de los pueblos más agredidos por el imperialismo en la historia, porque estamos ahora mismo padeciendo de hambre, de miseria, de un abuso, de un bloqueo criminal que no nos deja vivir, que no nos deja respirar.
El objetivo fundamental de esta agresión es apoderarse del petróleo de Venezuela y eso va a tener un impacto en Cuba.
Y Donald Trump al parecer no tiene límites, ni él ni Marco Rubio con su política asquerosa, criminal, no les importa.
Aquí hay un gobierno que está en funciones, un gobierno revolucionario en funciones. Aquí no hubo un golpe de Estado, aquí no hay un vacío de poder, aquí hay un pueblo revolucionario en control de su país, de su Estado, y tenemos un presidente secuestrado del cual este pueblo...
Estamos haciendo un balance del ámbito agroalimentario que es fundamental para el país. 2025 cierra con extraordinarios números,
Decimos que no queremos guerra en Venezuela, que lo que hicieron en Venezuela pusieron a temblar a nuestros hijos temblaban de horror, lloraban, gritaban, una situación muy terrible e incómoda. Y hoy que tengan al presidente Nicolás Maduro
Que ocurrió en la madrugada del 3 de enero del 2026. Pasará a la historia como una gran mancha en las relaciones.
Del sur hasta el oriente, el mensaje es duro, me respetan a los pueblos. Me liberen a Maduro. Me respetan a los pueblos. Me liberen a Maduro.
America is back.
Fui a la entrevista el martes y me deportaron el jueves, así que todo fue bien rápido. Ellos nunca me preguntaron si yo quería irme con...
Pregunta, comandante, ¿cuándo dejará Cuba de dar asistencia militar a Nicaragua?
Es un crimen.
¿Perdón?
Es un crimen.
No,
¿A cuántos países Estados Unidos le da asistencia militar? Al mundo entero.
No pueden decir de Maduro que tiene armas de destrucción masiva. O pueden decir de mí lo que dijeron de Saddam Hussein. No pueden. Nadie les creería. Entonces sacan los relatos que han sacado hollywoodenses, donde Maduro es el malo de la película y lo bueno...
El imperio norteamericano, que sigue amenazándonos, seguirá no solo conspirando contra la revolución bolivariana, sino lanzando operaciones de desgaste, operaciones...
Aquí nosotros pasamos la pérdida del comandante Hugo Chávez y nos levantamos. La pérdida dolorosa. Algunos apostaron a que nos íbamos a dividir y seguimos unidos. Tenemos la suerte que Nicolás y Cilia están vivos, no fueron asesinados y podemos seguir luchando por ellos. Durísimo.
Hace 465 horas, vale decir 19 días y 9 horas, sobre este mismo fuerte militar, sobre este mismo espacio donde nos encontramos.
La revolución bolivariana es quien gobierna este país. Compañera Delcy, al frente, todos nosotros acompañándola, con el interés de que este país salga adelante, que nuestro pueblo siga surgiendo por su propio esfuerzo. No dependemos de nadie más.
Liberen a Nicolás, grita una parte del mapa, mientras la garra del norte su sentencia destapa. Dicen que va hacia el norte sobre el mar prisionero,
a decirle al mundo entero.
Peace, peace, peace. This is Victor Coronado, and this is ANTICONQUISTA. We have a lot to cover tonight. ANTICONQUISTA, very quickly, let's just do some housekeeping. ANTICONQUISTA is an anti-imperialist media collective. Our content is produced by and for the Latin American Caribbean diaspora. Let me get Jesús onto the screen. All right, there we go. All right, so we have a lot to cover. Just very quickly, some housekeeping stuff. For folks watching, please like, please subscribe, please comment, please hit the notification bell. Check us out on all social media platforms. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on X, and we're on YouTube. We have some guests tonight. We have with us Jesús Rodríguez and Saheli from Orinoco Tribune. How are you folks doing?
We're fine.
Good, good, good. If you don't follow Orinoco Tribune, please check them out. You can check them out on Twitter and on all social media platforms. They have a wonderful website. They do a wonderful job of covering Venezuela news. And so please, they deserve all the help and support that you can give them. And then we also have the OG, Carlito Rovira, with us tonight. Carlito, how we doing?
We're doing fine, man. Ready to rock. Ready to rock.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're supposed to also have journalist John Jeter. He was supposed to be on tonight. Unfortunately, we have not heard from him, so maybe something happened, but he's not here at the moment. But we will be talking about some of his comments that he made on social media. All right. So now that we got all of that out of the way, the last program that we did was actually in December, and that was with you, Jesús. And at the time, I was very worried about what may possibly happen to Venezuela. We were talking about all the different possibilities, and then January 3rd happened. And so January 3rd, 2026 is a day that will, forever live in infamy in American history. On that date, the United States decided to attack and bomb Venezuela. It was roughly 2 a.m. My understanding, it was somewhere between 2 a.m. and 2:45, maybe 3 a.m. or so. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, and I started getting, the messages, and I saw some of the images, and I'll allow myself to be a little vulnerable here with the audience. I immediately started to shake and panic, and I even, I'm not afraid to admit, I started crying, just because you know, I knew what this would mean. And of course, we now know that over 100 people are dead, both military, combined between military and civilian life, and over 100 people are injured. Caracas was bombed. So were the states of Aragua, Miranda, and La Guaira. Were there Jesus, were there any other states that were bombed?
Not that we know. Not that we know. Actually, Charayave was hit, which is in Miranda State. Higuerote, that is another location, military location in Miranda State too. And in Maracay, which is in Aragua State, and there is the biggest air base in Venezuela, Libertador Air Base. And of course, the attacks on Caracas that were mostly focused on 4 locations: the Fuerte Tiuna military complex, the La Carlota military base, El Volcán, which is a location in the suburbs of Caracas where there's a lot of telecommunication infrastructure, and also Cajigal Observatory, which is very close to the resting place of Commander Hugo Chavez. So those were the locations of the attacks.
Okay. And on that night, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and the First Lady, also known as the first combatant in Venezuela, Cilia Flores, were kidnapped. You mentioned La Guaira. I know there was a warehouse, just to provide a little bit additional information, just to kind of drive the point home how savage these attacks were. There was a warehouse that was filled with like oncology, diabetes medicine, that was completely bombed and destroyed. You know, however, whatever you may think about Lula, and Lula is not like, let's say, the Chavistas in Venezuela, or the Fidelistas in Cuba, or the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. He did come forth and was able to provide some medicine immediately. I think there were two or three shipments of medicine that were sent.
There were three.
Three. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So, you know, I just wanted, for the record, you know, let's thank Lula for that. That was huge. And then my understanding, there was a scientific institute that was also bombed. Is that correct?
That's right. That's close to El Volcán, the location that I mentioned you before, that is in the suburbs of Caracas. Okay. Yes, and there is also a university in that same location, so they were affected also by the attack.
Yeah, civilian areas were whether it was targeted or.
Yes, especially Ciudad Tiuna, which is like a neighborhood inside the Fuerte Tiuna military complex, and those guys there were in panic, and there are videos of that online. People began to get out of there, running, screaming. You know, it is stressful to see those videos.
And I'm going to talk. I want to kind of talk about the stress in a little bit as well. Actually, let me back up just a little bit. We'll get back to that. Okay, so all of that. Oh, I don't want to forget that 32 members of the Cuban intelligence outfit that were personal security of President Nicolas Maduro were all assassinated. And so, you know, rest in peace and to those intelligence agents that were trying to do their best to protect the lives of both the president and the first lady. We know that the vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, is now assuming the acting president role. That happened immediately, pretty much after the attacks. And there was a press conference at 11 a.m. By the White House. It actually took place in Palm Beach, Florida. But you had President Trump, you had Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, and then you had Pete Hegseth, all there. And I do want to talk a little bit about that as well at some point. But actually, let's now. You know what? So part of some of the talking points here that I wanted to bring up, and some of the things I wanted to discuss about. You know, I immediately checked in with you after this happened, and I periodically have checked in with you. Can let's talk about that day, and then talk about, you know, the I guess the overall sentiment of the people. I've listened to some psychologists talk about the trauma that's come from this. VTV had, I think it was VTV, had a psychologist on for a few days, and he was talking about the psychology of all this, and how this has inflicted a lot of trauma on the Venezuelan people. And these are the Venezuelan people's words, but I don't have a problem owning up to these statements, and I don't want to get my comrades over Anticonquista in trouble, but I'll say it. These were terrorist attacks. I don't know how else you describe it other than terrorist attacks. When people were sleeping, we're talking about a time of festivities, and no one really, while we understood the threats, no one, Delcy, the acting president, literally said, no one expected such a barbaric attack. And so can you speak a little bit to that?
Yes, I mean, the trauma is there, absolutely. Actually, when there has been some electricity surges after the attacks where I live, thankfully no electricity blackouts, but electricity surges, and I immediately feel afraid, something that did not happen before, because at least in the part of Caracas where I live, the attacks began with the electricity blackout. So immediately after the blackout, we began to hear the strikes and the bombings. Even though I do not live extremely close to the places that were bombed, we hear the explosions, we hear the noises of the drones or helicopters that were used. And it's not a nice noise. It's like a different noise from the ones that you hear regularly from a helicopter or a firefighter, that are things that we're used to hear, at least here in Venezuela. But it was a different aircraft noise that sounded like a something like that, like a lot of bees flying around you. So, I mean, the stress is there. As I'm telling you, I was far away, and I am affected with that trauma, and I cannot imagine what happening with those people that are hundreds of families living in that neighborhood, inside Fuerte Tiuna, and also the people that live in the big neighborhood, which is El Coche Valle, that is in front of the Tiuna military complex. And I have talked with people that live in that area that told me that they were really afraid and that there was panic, and that some people are actually thinking in moving from where they live because of the U.S. strike. So there is a psychological trauma, absolutely. What I did was what any journalist could do. I mean, I basically ran outside the apartment and began I actually began a YouTube live with not too much to see, because everything was in dark, but at least you could see, the Avila mountain that is in front of where I live, and there was some electricities that also are close to the Miraflores Palace, which is the headquarters of the Venezuelan presidency, Venezuelan government. So that's basically what what I did, and immediately after that I began like an endless rounds of interviews with outlets from all over the world that lasted like for 2 or 3 days. And I actually got disconnected a little bit from Orinoco Tribune Works, and Sahili and Steve, the co-editors, and were the ones that helped me, keep the rhythm in Orinoco Tribune's operations.
Absolutely. Saheli, so I actually want to, let me put something up here on the screen. So you mentioned the noise, and can you folks, let's see, can we see that? So I don't know, is this much of a conversation over there, Jesus, about the use of a secret weapon? And, what are your takes on this, Saheli and Jesus, about this idea that I think even the Russians, started making them, and again, I don't know where those demands will nothing, if anything, will come out of it. But I think the Russians even were asking questions about, like, what were those special weapons that were used? And you hear, one thing Trump doesn't have, he doesn't have any discipline, and so he's been bragging about some of, without giving too many details, he's been bragging about some of the weapons that they used, and it's like they basically used Venezuela as an experiment, from my understanding. Again, if you believe, some of these reports.
Go ahead, Sahi.
Oh, I thought you would go first. But anyway, yeah, what you mentioned, that Trump has no discipline, I actually call him honest in his own way. So he is honest in the sense that he says everything. Like, he does not hide anything. He speaks the truth, even if he just speaks the truth. And there were people who actually told me that if Trump had these weapons, he would not be bragging about them, he would be using them. And I told them that he used them. In all probability, they used them. First of all, at the beginning, there was, first of all, coming this idea that there were only a few aircrafts that attacked. This probably came from the US media itself, I don't know. But there was the idea that a few aircraft attacked Venezuela and took out the entire air defenses and kidnapped the president and his wife. That was the initial. Then it slowly started coming out that they had used at least 150 aircraft and very different kinds of aircrafts, like all sorts of aircrafts that they had used. You would see in the countries of West Asia that they had been bombing since I was a child. So they used, for example, F-35 fighter jets. They used many different kinds of. They used B-1 bombers. They have used B-1 bombers in Yemen. They have used B-1 bombers in all countries of West Asia to bomb them. So they used B-1 bombers in Venezuela, and B-1 bombers actually, they used them in Afghanistan. They used them in Syria. They used them in Iraq. And you think of those, like you think of the images from those countries, the bombings of those countries that we have been seeing over 2 decades, and they destroy everything, right? They carry a lot of, they carry a huge weight in bombs, and wherever they're dropped, they're just destroyed. So if we had seen images, I think ANTICONQUISTA itself posted images on Facebook, etc., like on social media, and you would see the images, and you will see people blown into pieces. The same images that you had seen, in Palestine, that you had seen in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan. And the same images that you had seen, you would see them in Venezuela, and you would think that now these are home, right? That now it hits home, that people might have been killed in that. And yes, at least 108 people were killed in these attacks. There may have been more, but 108 is the number I think we have. And they used different kinds of, already all these different kinds of aircraft that they had all used in West Asia. And in addition to that, then Trump started bragging that they had used these weapons that had jammed air defenses, that had jammed telecommunications, that they have these weapons with which they can do something. So yes, it was a kind of, we'd say that yes, it was a kind of an experiment that, for a long time, like for years, the Zionist entity had been bragging that they use, their weapons are battle tested. That means that they have been using the weapons in Palestine. In the very same way, the US used some weapon, whether they're experimental, whether they already have it. They already have it. So they used it on Venezuela. And now the weapons companies would probably say that they are battle tested, that they have used weapons that actually disabled or disoriented air defense systems so that they could bomb a country like this, a country that had been actually expecting a military aggression for a long time. And even then they could bomb a country and they could just also kidnap the president and the first lady, who is also a parliamentarian. So, initially, I think when we were here last time, I had said that we had been expecting decapitation strikes. Of course, what I meant by that is that they would be trying to do the same kinds of thing that they have done in Palestine, that they have done in Yemen, that they have taken out, the civilian authorities in order to generate destabilization in a country. We had been expecting this for a very long time, and yet I think I expressed this in many places, that yet when it did happen, it was very difficult to believe that it had happened, and that they had been able to kidnap the president and his wife instead of we had expected that actually they would kill the civilian leadership of Venezuela, which they still can do. Like this is I would say that the attacks were like it was just like a warning. It was, of course, it did happen. I mean, people are dead, but it is also a warning to every one of us around the world, everyone in the world, that the US just can't do anything. That they can come into your country, that they can kill your people, that they can kill your leadership, that they can abduct your leadership, that they can just do anything, and you cannot do anything about it. So it was, like we say, it is a hybrid war. Even in, and it is an open military aggression, it is still a hybrid war because it carries a psychological effect of it, that it just instills fear in you. It just instills this sort of desperation in you, and this sort of the despair in you that you cannot do anything about it. So it is about both a military aggression, I will say, as well as a psychological aggression. Not just a bombs dropping and terrifying, traumatizing people, traumatizing children, but also at the same time it is a traumatizing effect on everyone around the world, that you are in danger all the time.
I'd like to ask a couple of questions. I'd like to ask both of y'all, were there any ground troops other than when they kidnapped President Maduro and La Compañera? Were there in any of the other cities? Were there any like Navy SEALs activities?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
The at least from the information that we have, the dropping of military troops only happened in Fuerteventura with these elite U.S. commandos, Delta, whatever, and it lasted, like, according to what they say, like 30 or 40 minutes. And inside Fuerteventura, there were resistance from these troops that were killed. I mean, we're talking about the 32 Cubans, but we're talking also about 47 Venezuelans that were there. So I mean, at least they didn't risk to drop more U.S. military in other places.
I would just say that I had received some messages from people maybe within 2-3 days afterwards that were saying that this, the idea of having a militia, or Venezuela has a huge military, so the idea of having a military, including like ground military and militia, is stupid because the US does air wars. I would just say that the US would not land ground troops in Venezuela, and that they did not land ground troops in Venezuela precisely because of the militia as well as the military that Venezuela has, that if you are on the ground, it will lead to protracted war, like the US has been dragged into, or not dragged into it itself put itself into those wars in different countries of West Asia, as it had done earlier in Vietnam, in Laos, in Cambodia. In the same way, they would have been drawn into a protracted war in Venezuela. That is why they did not drop ground troops anywhere in Venezuela, except the operation to kidnap the president and the first lady.
I would add to what Sahili have said about the weapons, and I believe that there might be a mix of possibilities. I mean, I'm of the opinion, and since the very beginning, that we did not defend enough the country and President Maduro. That doesn't mean that I'm not saying that there was no resistance. There was resistance, and we haven't seen reports about that resistance and the death toll and everything. But I believe that also is something that might be affected by the use of high technology. So what President Trump is saying, I believe that there might be a mix of truth and lies, because he loves to brag also. And in that way, by bragging, he is also trying to to smear Russian and Chinese military capabilities that they say that were easily defeated by them in this strike, because the most important military capabilities that Venezuela has is basically from Russia and China, especially the radar systems, the anti-aircraft systems that we have. So, but I am of the opinion that we might have done something, and I believe that somehow ignites this, that I'm sure we'll discuss soon, these theories about treason and things like that. But I believe that maybe there were some people. Actually, the son of President Maduro said at the beginning in his first speech, he talked about the possibility of treason, but he asked in a very reasonable way that we have to wait until everything is settled, all the information is more visible, to try to point fingers at if there was a mistake, a treason or negligence or whatever. So actually, the ambassador of the Russian Federation here in Caracas yesterday makes a few statements about that, and the part that caused my attention the most was him talking about negligence as a real possibility, and he might have more information than us, because he is the one that has to deal with the operation and at least the assistance, the military assistance to Venezuela in the use of these military weapons that we have.
I just like to add that part of what was planned to be the discussion here tonight were leftists, not just some of the comments that were made by Don Jeter, but throughout the world, and in particular, and especially inside of the United States, there's a lot of conspiracy theorists that are really what I called, reactionary, imperialist propaganda, disguised in the form of conspiracy theory. Whatever the case may be, Venezuela is not obligated to explain that part. The obligation, the onus, really falls on the U.S. left and on the left in most of the imperialist countries of the world to condemn what the United States did when they kidnapped President Maduro and la primera combatista. That's really the issue, and whatever internal politics there may be, that is a matter for the Venezuelan people to handle up, I, like my brother Victor, we're very adamant that the Venezuelan people have the ultimate say in that matter, because it is the final and ultimate expression of self-determination, and I wanted to express that to you, because there's on the internet and in the politics of the United States, there's a lot of blame on the Venezuelan government. And what that is really being, facilitated by is the Central Intelligence Agency. And that we have to be very clear about that.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I was going to leave that part for a little bit later, but since you're on it, I might as well get right into it. Now, we did invite John Jeter. Now, I promised him a proper introduction, but he's not here. Now, John Jeter, give me a second here. Here we go. So who is John Jeter? He's twice a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. John Jeter is a former Washington Post foreign correspondent in Southern Africa and South America, where he reported on the Bolivarian Revolution. He's the author of Flat Broke and the Free, How Globalization Fleeced Working People and Class War in America, How Whites Divide the Nation by Asking, Are You a worker, or are you white? So John Jeter, if you're listening, or if eventually you get to see this, I gave you your proper introduction. You know, maybe I helped you sell some books there. But I gotta then talk about this since we're on the topic. I wanted to save it till later, but there is a lot of, see, for the audience at home watching this. So let me back up a little bit. So John Jeter made some statements that I'm going to read right now. I responded to him, and he did that on Facebook. I responded to him, and then he subsequently blocked me. And then somehow we had an agreement for him to come on tonight, so he can defend these claims, and then we can have a conversation. I'm going to read. I'll be quick, but this is some of the stuff that's actually going on within the Western left. But these are his words. I'm not taking anything out of context. These are his words that he wrote. Maduro's abduction was almost certainly a coup engineered by his inner circle, including his vice president. It seems clear to me and Eva Gollinger, a Venezuelan journalist and Chavez's biographer, that Rodriguez, talking about Delcy, organized a coup. I think Rodriguez betrayed the Bolivarian Revolution. A lot of people whom I respect have responded negatively to my speculation that Maduro was betrayed by someone in his inner circle, likely his vice president, talking about Delcy, and her brother, Jorge Rodriguez, who is he the president of the National Assembly? Yes. President of the National Assembly. And then he goes on to say, do I know this is a fact? Absolutely not. Could I prove it in a criminal court? I most definitely could not, but I would stand a pretty good chance in civil court. You know, he goes on and on, you know, saying, you know, that this essentially blaming Delcy and saying that she's you know, between her and her brother, that they're responsible for this. I responded to him with the following, and this is what got me blocked. So just bear with me, folks. And then I just have a few words about this, and then I want to talk about fake news altogether. But this was my response to him on Facebook. I said, 32 members of Maduro's Cuban security detail are dead, having fallen while valiantly resisting imperialist forces. The full extent of the injuries sustained by the attacking Delta Forces soldiers remains unknown. Just as a side note, very quickly, Ignacio Ramonet, folks can check out the interview he did with the remaining Cuban survivor who fought and, you know, didn't lose his life, and check out some of his comments. So, you know, it's not how people are portraying it, that like these people just laid down and, you know, all these I'm hearing all types of weird conspiracy theories that it was the Venezuelan soldiers all types of weird stuff on the left. So anyways, I'll continue. This was my response. To call this an easy capture is a profound misrepresentation. Your post substitutes speculation for analysis. It provides no facts, cites no primary sources, and even admits its claims could not withstand scrutiny in a criminal court. This is not journalism. It's bochinche y chisme. It's gossip. The reality is that Venezuela was invaded and bombed while the country slept during a period of annual festivities when many military personnel were home with their families. Acting President Delcy Rodriguez has stated that they received no warning of such a barbaric, unprovoked attack. Even Maduro's son, Nicolas Maduro Guerra, has publicly admitted he underestimated the imperialists' audacity. The Chavista government was not naive to the threats surrounding it, but it did not anticipate the scale of imperialist adventure. Since the terrorist attacks of January 3rd, 2026, the government has responded with one cohesive voice. There has been zero dissension. They continue to govern. They have restored normalcy and are mobilizing daily. And then this is what I have seen and documented, and you know, I've been on conference calls and whatnot with Chavistas. Jesus, I speak to you all the time. They're calling on the international community to solidarity in the streets. They're demanding the return of the president and the first lady. They're engaging world leaders to support their sovereign demands, and they're affirming their unwavering authority in Venezuela's right to relations with nations like China and Cuba. And I finally said, these are the facts. Anyone parroting capitalist media talking points, likely crafted by the CIA, is no friend to the Bolivarian Revolution. And then that's what got me blocked. And I stand by those statements, and I just kind of want to, if we can talk a little bit about that, Jesus, because there's a lot of fake news. There's always been fake news around Venezuela, even when the first Hugo Chavez, when there was a coup against Hugo Chavez in 2002, we talked about that off air. There was fake news then. Delcy, there's a leaked recording audio that's been out there now that Delcy said that they threatened her with. They said that she's talking about the Americans. The Americans told her, the acting Venezuelan president, that they had assassinated President Maduro, and that she was next, Diosdado Cabello and Vladimir Lopez, and that they had 15 minutes to decide their fate. And her response in a leaked recording to, I guess, members of the Assembly, National Assembly, or other Chavista leadership, is that they were willing to meet the same fate. And they were given 15 minutes to decide their fate, quote unquote. So there's been, if you read what I would call the capitalist press, and I read the capitalist press, there are a lot of unnamed sources. It's always unnamed sources. No one wants to attach their name to it. It's just unnamed sources. And for people who don't understand how this works, historically, this is a thing that we know. We know this to be true. We got the historical documents. We can prove this to be true. Going back to Vietnam, the CIA, the State Department will give information out to legislators, to the press, so then they can make statements, and then somehow these statements become fact. But they're based off of no reality. Like, it's not based off of reality. It's based off of talking points that are given to journalists and to legislators and say, hey, this is what's happening.
Sahe, you go first. I want to hear your perspective from India. I mean, how you have seen this from India, and I also know that you have to go eventually, so I want you to give you the benefit of speaking first.
Okay, so these ideas. Okay, so I think that at the beginning, when there was this information vacuum, I am talking about the very beginning, just after the attacks. So when we did not know what exactly had happened, how many people were dead, who had been killed, and it is from that moment that this news started circulating, that there was no resistance in Venezuela, that it was a bloodless operation, that President Maduro and Celia Flores had been given up, had been just given to them, delivered to the US. That there were all these these ideas started circulating, and then some news outlets started to I would say repeat, or rather reprint, a story that had first appeared in the Gusano outlet called Havana Times. So that was the original source of this story, that Delcy Rodriguez and her brother Jorge Rodriguez, who is the president of the National Assembly, they had cut deals with the US in Qatar. Now, had there been meetings in Qatar? Yes, there had been, but those meetings were like part of the part of the political dialogue, or the national dialogue, and it has been happening for various countries have mediated these political dialogues. Qatar is one of them. Norway has been another, and there are actually many countries that have been mediating both the political dialogues of Venezuela as well as the Venezuelan back channel talks, negotiations, etc. with the US, because yes, back channel talks exist in every country, including Cuba. It always existed. So these things are there. It's not like they did not happen, but fake news is not just lies. It is a mix of truth and lies. So there is something that really did happen, which are the meetings in Qatar, and I mean, we know about them. And these outlets, Havana Times, and then later it was, I think, Miami Herald, that started with this news that it was in these meetings in Qatar that Delcy Rodriguez and Jorge Rodriguez had cut deals with the US to just to allow them to take President Maduro, to take Venezuela. Then they will denationalize probably, somehow, gift Venezuelan oil and natural resources to US corporations. And I mean, that was the origin of the story. Then every outlet, including the ones that are known as liberal or left, like The Guardian and all, they started reprinting the same story. And they have even linked to the articles, either in Havana Times. They have linked to that article. They said, this is our source. Now, most people just read the headlines. Okay, they do not read into that. They do not read the body of the article. They do not see where things are coming from. So they would just read the headlines, and they would think that they are adding two and two to make four, when I mean it's not even two and two. Like for example, this thing about like, giving oil to the US. Venezuela, I mean, US had been Venezuela's second largest business partner until 2019, until the US blockade itself ended that. So until 2019, when Venezuelan oil, a lot of Venezuelan oil would flow into the US legally. Because I mean, even after the oil sanctions of 2016, there were oil flowing into the US. There were US corporations that were operating in Venezuela, and we know that Chevron still operates, under licenses that the Office of Foreign Assets Control grants them, like various licenses they grant, and they keep on extending the period of the licenses, so that they always said it is just for winding down operations or something, but Chevron keeps on operating in Venezuela using under those licenses, and they keep on exporting Venezuelan oil to the US. So these things are there, and so people think that this is there is Chevron is there. Chevron has always been there, but people think, okay, the US Oil Corporation is there. It must mean that the Delcy Rodriguez is giving up Venezuelan oil to the US, or giving up Venezuelan resources to the US. She says something about boosting mining, production of mining production, and it will be construed as considering those articles that I mentioned, connecting those with this, okay, it's boosting mining production. That means that this will actually go to the US, even like without any reason. She did not say US. She said Venezuela has the right to maintain, respectful diplomatic relations with all countries of the world. She named many countries. She also mentioned US, and I think, okay, she mentioned US. That means she wants to, have diplomatic relations with the US. Venezuela had diplomatic relations with the US, and it was not Venezuela that ended the diplomatic relations with the US. It was the US itself did, and then there was this news of this exploratory mission of re-establishing the diplomatic relations. It has not happened yet. Okay, and even when there was this only the news of just trying to see if it is possible, and exploration means that, not just trying to see if it is possible, yet that was construed again as, okay, Venezuela and US are now friends. Even after the bombing and everything, Venezuela and US are now friends, and there will be relations among them. So this is the way that fake news propagates. Like, there are some truths some true events that are really taking place. And the thing is this, it was President Maduro who had been saying all the time that Venezuela wants to re-establish diplomatic relations with the US. And it will also help in many cases, including the repatriation flights, because currently, the Conviasa, which is the Venezuelan national airline, it is sanctioned. So it cannot land flights in the US. Either it needs to get permits each and every time that, a repatriation flight has to be organized. Either it needs to get court orders from some US courts, like court permits from some US courts, in order to land a flight in a particular airport, in order to get the migrants back, or some US airline has to get permissions again from US authorities in order to take these people and go to Venezuela, or it has to be done through some third country like Mexico or like Honduras, things that have happened, right? So this means that if there were even the minimum of diplomatic relations, all these triangulations did not have to take place. And it is not the only one. Like, for example, the cases regarding Citgo, the other cases that there are against Venezuelan state, that the U.S. oil corporations, U.S. mining corporations have in U.S. courts since the 2000s, Venezuela cannot send any legal team. Venezuela cannot send any legal representation to those courts because of the sanctions. People think that sanctions are just, I mean, sanctions actually have tremendous effect on every sphere of life, including administration and, you know, these legalities and jurisdictions. So Venezuela cannot send any legal representation. It has to contract US legal representatives in order to like represent the Venezuelan state in these cases. So if there had been a minimum of diplomatic relations, this would not have taken place. Like Venezuela could have sent legal representation to these cases, and things could have been easier for the Venezuelan state. So what I mean is that it was President Maduro who has said all these years that he wants respectful relations. The Cuban president says the same, that that the relations with the US is possible, but only with the respect, mutual respect for international law, respect for sovereignty, respect for non-interference in internal affairs, all these things. And all these are misconstrued. Like when Delcy Rodriguez says the same things that President Maduro has been saying for years, those are misconstrued as she selling out, as she the traitor. Now, I don't know what is there. Of course, first of all, there is a lack of knowledge of the fact that the Venezuelan state is not a one-man or a one-woman show, that a single person does not take decisions, that the moment, even when like she was not the acting president, she was still the executive vice president. I mean, she still is that. But when she was not even sworn in as the acting president, she had like called in a council called a National Defense Council, and there are like all the important people of government are there. So it's not like she is alone taking any decisions. All these things are discussed, and what comes to us is after whatever has been discussed, after that it comes to us. It's not like she is not Trump. She does not post on social media whatever she thinks, whatever she wakes up one morning and thinks, oh yeah, this is it. And I thank you for your attention to that matter. No, she's not that person, right? So first of all, there is a lack of knowledge of how the Venezuelan state works. Or I mean, I think the US people are used to one-man shows, and they sort of extrapolate it to every country in the world, and that is one. And secondly, that of course there is also, I think, as a racism there, that it is a third world country, a country of dark-skinned people. They do not understand things as we white people do. I mean, I'm not a white person, but I'm just saying from the point of view that as we white people understand. And I think there is also misogyny. I mean, all these things are there.
I was about to say that.
Okay, so there's also misogyny. So all these things are there. That is, I think that creates the fertile ground for all these conspiracy theories to flourish.
You said something to me, I'm trying to look it up. You said something to me in private. We were having a private conversation via text, and you said, the other thing is, like, let's be real also with the reality, which is that Venezuela was just their airspace, was just invaded and bombed, and their president has been kidnapped. So people say, well, the Chavistas have what leverage do they have? They don't. Let's be real. You don't have any leverage right now. And then not only that, at the 11 o'clock a.m. press conference, Trump said, we are prepared for a second wave, which confirms the leaked video, or audio rather, of Delcy saying the threats are constant, the blackmails are constant. So, the name of today's program was, negotiating at gunpoint. So understand that concessions are going to be made. And Saheli, you made a point to me in private. You said, she's responsible for the lives of millions of people. So in other words, it's so easy for us here in the West to pump our chest and say, she's a sellout, she's not revolutionary enough, and the Chavistas are selling out, and da-da-da. They're literally being threatened with and again, Trump always speaks in hyperbole, says the second wave will be much worse, much, much worse. So I'm watching this from home, and I'm seeing the masterful job that this woman has done with, if you want to call it a public relations campaign, calling international leaders. Chavistas are making international phone calls with the international left, if you will. They're saying to people back, wherever you're from, go home and protest, be in the streets, occupy places of power. If anyone's been paying attention, there's massive demonstrations in Venezuela all the time all over the country asking for the return of Nicolas Maduro and Delcy Rodriguez. They've returned the country back to normalcy. People are back to work. They're back to school. And she's saying, we're not, I can play the audio. It's a great, I recommend, if it's a real, I believe it to be the real audio, where she says, we're not dealing with, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, with like a rational person. And we're dealing with a nuclear power. So the balances of power are not equal in terms of military. But what we have is that we have a moral superiority. That was powerful. When I heard that, I said, this is a rational human being that understands what is happening and is saying, how do I, and she talks about in the leak audio, we have to preserve political power, because if we lose Chavismo, can you imagine what would happen to the country, to the most vulnerable, to the working class, to the people who've been most impacted by the revolution?
Victor, the Cuban Revolution has also been, criticized for capitulation in many similar ways. The Chinese Revolution was also condemned by many of these supposed revolutionaries in the imperialist countries for the same reasons. The thing that most people don't understand is that there are two sides to any revolutionary experience, Venezuela being one of them. And that is that there's a distinction between revolutionary policy and diplomacy. Diplomacy is a totally different arena that you utilize as a tool. You utilize it also as a weapon, especially for countries that do not have, as you said, do not have nuclear weapons, do not have the sophistication of an armada, a naval armada, do not have the financial institutions such as the IMF. It's been recently, and it's a new thing for once the BRICS was created. Okay, financial institutions are also used as weapons, and that is something that was used against Venezuela going back to Hugo Chavez. Okay. The IMF does not operate as a financial institution. It operates as a weapon of imperialism, and those are the things that we have to consider, because Venezuela has one obligation, and that is to survive this period. Okay. It has, and right. The other obligation is to enhance and develop the Bolivarian revolution. Again, this is a matter of the right of self-determination, and that alone is a point that many idiots on the left, okay, do not understand, because they are complicit in many ways. They are complicit in the imperialist policies that are being carried out against that country.
Let me add something about my experience, around this issue of the electricity. I mean, a few hours after the whole attack happened, the social media platforms began to be populated by all these conspiracy theories. The first one that I read was about President Maduro negotiating his exit from Venezuela. And when I read that, I was like, how he can negotiate, and then they come and invade us and kill a lot of people and drop a lot of bombs. It doesn't make too much sense. So immediately it didn't click in my head. And the second one was the one that Sahili mentioned, and that we have seen everywhere, that Delcy, even Diosdado, they have been trying later to point at him also. But the first one was about Delcy Rodriguez and her brother Jorge, being the ones that betray him. And when I read that also, I was like, they don't know. I mean, the people that write and try to spread those things are people that do not know the history of Chavismo. They don't know, do not know about the leadership of Chavismo. And when I read that, it didn't make any sense to me, especially because Delcy Rodriguez is one of the strongest Chavista leaders. So I believe that some people out there believe that she's a newcomer and that she's just because they haven't heard from her. I mean, that happened a lot because of ignorance. People, they think that Maduro appointed her as vice president a couple of years ago. Delcy Rodriguez has been there since the beginning of the Bolivarian Revolution, where Hugo Chavez was there. And she have occupied all the, I mean, not all, but a lot of positions within the structures of the Venezuelan state. She was a deputy minister of foreign affairs during Chavez time. She lasted like a year after, and then she fought with Chavez because she is known for having a very strong character. But then a few months later, she was appointed in another position, and she became, I believe, appointed Minister for Communications. And then she was appointed Foreign Minister during the last years of President Hugo Chavez, the last months of President Hugo Chavez, actually. And she has been in the National Assembly. She has been everywhere. I mean, and she's a very strong Chavista leader that is not new, that has been there forever. So those narrative and those conspiracy theories are only resonate in the heads of people that do not know exactly how Chavismo is. How, and the most important thing to say is that leadership is not in the, how do you say that? En el vacío, in the vacuum, right?
In the vacuum.
I mean, in the vacuum, exactly. I mean, the Chavista leadership is fed by the Chavista movement, which is something extremely big. And that is something that I have said for several months or even years, that even if the U.S. tried to decapitate Chavista leadership, Chavismo will remain there, because Chavismo is a real movement, it's a real feeling, it's something that goes beyond its leadership and that fits its leadership. So it's a complex process that not too many people understand, because they trust all the lies that has been thrown on us over the decades by mainstream media, by the far right, and all those guys. So anyway, I
got a question for you. Can you talk a little bit about who's their father? I'm talking about Delcy and Jorge. So and can you talk a little bit about who he was, how he was, how his life ended, and what how he was part of? I guess my understanding is he created the Socialist League, right?
Yes. He was a socialist, a Marxist leader of the Venezuelan left during the 60s and 70s, and he was not only a leader, he was a deputy for the Venezuelan Congress at that time, and being a congressman did not save him for being captured by the political police of the time. The DCIP was the name, and being taken to a jail where they basically killed him by beating him till his death.
Tortured. And
he was tortured and he was killed while being tortured, and then they dropped his body, I don't know where, through with an helicopter, and no one knew where he was for years. So Jorge Rodríguez and Delcy Rodríguez are the kids of Jorge Rodríguez's father, and that is this leader of Venezuela that is important and has been a historical leader of the Venezuelan left for several decades already. So they come from that family also.
Yeah, and they were children when their father was killed, so it's not like
Yes.
they don't know.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about. So okay, wait. So let me see if I can pull this up here. There was a New York Times article that came out, I believe, almost immediately. Yeah, here it is. Let me see if I can just share this. Bear with me here just a second. I thought this was to me, it was, again, not that it's a laughing matter, but sometimes you have to make light of some of the stuff. But I saw this and I just couldn't stop laughing because we all know that. So, all right, let's back up a little bit. So why did the United States kidnap Nicolas Maduro? They said it was a
culture.
I'm sorry?
A culture of crime.
Well, yeah. So they said this was a basically under, and I'm not using the correct terms here, so Helen, you may help me out here. I guess like a criminal arrest, extradition, because he's being accused of being a narco trafficker, and whatnot. And so this was this came out almost immediately after he was kidnapped. The Justice Department drops claim that Venezuela's Cartel de los Soles is an actual group. There's more in there, but the indictment, which is a superseding indictment, had to change the language about the Cartel de los Soles, which we've been hearing about forever. And in fact, President Trump that morning he literally made that claim, right? That, he's, the Cartel de los Soles, that, linking Maduro to it. When you read the indictment, they had to change the language to it. It basically admitting that Cartel de los Soles is not a real thing. It's a culture. Like, so again, how do you, in a real court, right? In a real court, how do you litigate that, right? How do you litigate a guy who's a leader of a culture? What does that even mean, right? And then there's the Tren de Aragua, TDA, which again, he was supposed to be this big, I guess, leader of the TDA, the Tren de Aragua. They had to change that language as well to say there may be like a loose connection there somehow. Some of the other charges were about him having machine guns, which is ridiculous because he's a head of state. Of course, he has access to machine guns. Every President Trump has access to machine guns if he wants to, because he's the president of the United States. It's like a ridiculous charge. So can you folks talk a little bit about these charges, which are completely bogus, and no one believes it. I mean, no one even in the DEA believes it. But this is what's put out there.
All the charges are ridiculous. All the charges are ridiculous and have no meaning, but that does not mean that there will be no quote-unquote trial based on them. So this story about the Cartel de los Soles has been going on for, even now there are people who are writing, Maduro he's a narco trafficker, or he is the leader of a narco trafficking organization, when this organization, Cartel de los Soles, never existed. And we have been saying this for a very long time, that there is no such organization as a Cartel de los Soles. It does not exist. It never existed. And the Venezuelan state is one of the most, it has an exemplary record in the fight against drugs. So firstly, and this goes back to, this is coming from the United Nations Organization on the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime, and they have been reporting since at least 1999 that Venezuela never had any drug crops. Venezuela was never a producer of drugs. It was never a producer of drugs. Not even before the Bolivarian Revolution. Also, it was not a producer of drugs. It was known for being a producer of drugs or a cultivator of drugs, or for drug usage. So it is not just there in the drug map. It just does not exist. Okay, and this has been consistent for at least 27 years, not just today. Okay? And secondly, that whatever drugs are there, that Venezuela shares borders, the longest border with the first in world in production of drugs, in production of cocaine, that is Colombia, which again is because of the US, not just because Colombians are drug addicts or anything, nothing like that. So whatever drugs that enter through Colombia into the Venezuelan territory, then the borders are not really like that. The border between Venezuela and Colombia is very porous. There are legal border passages as well as illegal ones, and everybody just like it's not like the border is very tightly controlled. People live there, right? It's a region anyway. So whatever drugs that enter into the Venezuelan territory, the Venezuelan state fights it, like it fights the drug trafficking that might occur through the Venezuelan territory, whether through the border or through the Caribbean, like exit into the Caribbean. So, and this is also recorded, and Venezuela has been praised by not just by the UN ODC, but also even by DEA says that Venezuela is not a drug country or anything to do with drugs. DEA itself says that, CIA says that, everybody says that Venezuela has nothing to do with drugs. Even then, like this is something President Maduro himself said, that nobody is going to believe that Venezuela has weapons of mass destruction, right? That same claims that had been made about Iraq in 2003, those things, nobody is going to believe that Venezuela has weapons of mass destruction. Nobody will believe that. So there is already this culture, there is this cultural stereotype about Latinos and drugs. So it is easy to project, to create a story, a narrative that the South American country has something to do with drugs. It is
dictator with the mustache.
So
but yeah, playing off that the stereotypes, it's like, oh yeah, the dictator with the mustache. I mean, this is how Americans view the world. It's like, the Latin dictator with the mustache. He's the drug kingpin. The drug lord.
It's easy. And on the other hand, a real drug kingpin. Real drug kingpins are friends of the US. They are vessels of the US. I'm thinking of Alvaro Uribe. But anyway, based on that stereotype that created the story that the Venezuela is a narco trafficking state, that it traffics drugs into the US, uses it as a weapon, that it is a weaponization of drug trafficking into the US to make people in the US addicts, to kill the US. In fact, that is why they designated the Venezuelan government as a narco-terrorist organization, a foreign terrorist organization, right? They designated the entire Venezuelan government as a foreign terrorist organization. So,
I apologize, but I got to ask you something. This is really important, and I'm sorry. I hope you don't lose your train of thought. But this is really important. Answer this question, because this is like the big thing in the United States. Does Venezuela produce fentanyl?
Fentanyl, no. Not even for medical use.
And why is that important?
Why is so? Well, there is the story that you will say it better. You'll know that it's better than me, that there is a crisis, regarding fentanyl in the US. I think 100,000 people die each year from fentanyl overdose, and this has been during Trump's campaign. He made this a point that he will stop the entry of fentanyl into the US when fentanyl illegally is produced inside the US and in Canada. The technology is there, and there are fentanyl laboratories that are not legal, but they're both in the US and in Canada, and there is also a part that enters through Mexico. And this fentanyl, Mexico itself also does not produce fentanyl for medical use, but it does import fentanyl for medical use. And through corruption, of course, a part of it goes into the hands of drug traffickers who transit it through the border of the US. And let's talk about this, that who are the people who distribute these drugs in the US? Because it's not like when fentanyl enters the US, it grows legs and arms and wings and flies about, right? It must be people who distribute it to those addicts in the US, right? So these things are not talked about. The fentanyl laboratories in Canada that have been dismantled also, those are not talked about. Instead, it is Venezuela, which has never produced, which does not have the technology to produce fentanyl. It does not have the technology to produce fentanyl. Fentanyl is not medically used in Venezuela. It is medically used in many countries, right? It has medical usage, and it is a highly controlled drug in China, for example. It's highly controlled. Nobody gets it. It's only used in hospitals for pain relief in chemotherapy patients. So you can imagine, how is it possible that people in the streets get access to these drugs? This has to be a problem of the US, but it's just projecting, and it's sort of exporting its problem to other countries, in the sense that it is Venezuela. Just any country. Venezuela is just a placeholder. If it can be any country that can be accused of producing or exporting illegally fentanyl to the US to make people addicts. And Venezuela never produced fentanyl. Never. It does not produce fentanyl. So yet the story is there that it's transporting fentanyl in small boats that would need to refuel 50 times, I believe, in order to cross the Caribbean and then the Gulf of Mexico and go into the US, right? So using this, using this narrative, weaponizing this drug narrative, the US has been killing. It has killed, by now it has killed, I think, 123 people in the Caribbean Sea and in the Pacific Ocean around Mexico and all. So it has killed people in boats, and those were fishing boats. Those were just fishers who were killed, accused, but wrongly accused of being drug traffickers. So like even after death, their name is being tarnished. And Venezuela has also been similarly tarnished as a drug trafficker, producer and trafficker of fentanyl, and the government itself apparently leads this organization. Now, Cartel de los Soles, there have been like many leaders of Cartel de los Soles over the years, including Diosdado Cabello. Like for a long time, it was Diosdado Cabello who supposedly led this organization, and then when the US started to, when the Trump administration started to, target, not even Trump administration, Trump as a presidential candidate started to personally target President Maduro, he used to just say that, people forgot about Diosdado Cabello, and it became Nicolas Maduro who became the supposed head of this organization, Cartel de los Soles, which never existed. On the other hand, Tren de Aragua does exist. But it was not a drug trafficking organization. It was never a drug trafficking organization. And I say this, I am not making an apology for organized crime, but Tren de Aragua was an extortionist organization. It originated in the plains when the railway lines were being laid there, like when the railway lines were being constructed there, it started as an organization that extorted the workers, the supervisors, etc., that we will give you security if you give us money. So that was the original organization. They're basically thugs. So that is the Tren de Aragua, and there are other also, like Tren del Llano is the same sort of organization that the train is there because of that, because they're associated with the railway construction, not because of any other reason. So, and it was not a drug trafficking organization. Yes, it may have connections with Colombian drug traffickers, and these days, during the Venezuelan mass migration that was created due to the US sanctions, people who were migrating, these Tren de Aragua people, they sometimes acted as migrant traffickers, and they colluded with the migrant traffickers of Central America. And in that case, they may have come into contact with drug traffickers, and they may have done some transactions here and there, but the Tren de Aragua as an organization was never a drug trafficking organization. And secondly, it had never any connection with the Venezuelan state. Rather, they were opposed to each other. Right, when the Venezuelan state has been trying to dismantle all these organized crime gangs for a very long time, and in 2022 it did intervene in prisons and in many places where Tren de Aragua and other such organizations were operating, and they dismantled these organizations. They were broken up into small cells, and its people, like heads, some heads were captured, some were killed, whereas the others, they fled into the neighboring countries, especially taking into account that during 2019, starting from 2019 and the mass migration, they would migrate with them. So they went to Chile, they went to Colombia, they went to Argentina, they went to El Salvador, they went everywhere, Mexico, they went everywhere. And in these places, they could have set up small cells in collaboration with local gangs and may have done some drug work, but the Venezuelan state and the Tren de Aragua were always opposed. There was always a fight between them. There is no loose connection. The only connection that is there is that they are enemies. So these stories, of course, the stories that are there, like you mentioned, the stereotype, the mustached drug kingpin stereotype about Latinos, I believe that this stereotype has, this has actually helped in establishing these narratives, these stories about Venezuela, the Venezuelan government and the Venezuelan authorities in the US, apart from the fact that the United States possesses a real weapon of mass destruction, which is its disinformation media. I think I would have to go because my day starts already.
I know. Thank you. Saheli, you're always it's always great to have you on because you're just a wealth of knowledge, and we always appreciate your presence.
She left me speechless. I cannot add anything to what she said.
No, Saheli's great. Saheli's great. The point you made, and I know you got to go, Saheli, but the point you made about, for America, again, I have to be careful what I say here because I know I'm going to get attacked from all angles. But, for the Americans that are like tough, like they love the whole tough on crime stuff, that's essentially what Venezuela did. If someone can correct me if I'm wrong, right? I mean, you're nodding your head, yes. I mean, and if I had to guess, this is just me now guessing and making a presumption. In Cuba took made great strides after the revolution in 1959 to make sure that public safety is like one of the pillars of their society. And in Venezuela, I mean, I remember Venezuela. Again, I didn't visit, but I know people who were from there. I talked to a lot of people. Right after Hugo Chavez took power, I remember Venezuela being a very dangerous place.
Yes.
And Jesus, what's it like now?
Yes, it was. There are a couple of things that I would add to what Sahili said. The first one is that this downgrade of Cartel de los Soles that you mentioned, Victor, in the prosecution between quotations against President Maduro is a result of the inexistence of the Cartel de los Soles. It's the best evidence. I mean, I believe that they only left only two reference to the Cartel de los Soles in the, how do you call it, in the document, indictment document, whatever you call it there. But that says a lot. But also what President Trump said during his press conference after the attack against Venezuela is extremely important. I mean, he mentioned oil like 27 times in 40 minutes that he spoke. So that make it clear that the whole scene about drug trafficking, the narco-terrorist stuff was a lie. So, and he mentioned Tren de Aragua was, as Healy said, I'm talking about the press conference. He mentioned the Tren de Aragua during the press conference, repeating the same BS that he always says about Venezuelans and the crimes in the U.S. and the mental health institutions in Venezuela being, emptied and sent to the U.S., which is a terrible thing, especially against Venezuelan migrants that lives in the U.S. that he is basically demonizing. But anyway, that reference to the Tren de Aragua is based on a lie because Tren de Aragua doesn't have anything to do with the Venezuelan state, and for all the reasons as Sahili already mentioned. So now going back to your question, what was your question?
No, he's just
I forgot.
talked about public security, and I will just tell you something.
Exactly. Go ahead.
Runs at night. So you can imagine, I don't know in how many places in the US you can run, and in large cities like Caracas is a very huge city, and
But it is true that we have a crime issue. I mean, we cannot deny that even during Chavista times.
Yes.
And I associate that in that crime increase. There is a mix of explanation that I have built in my head since that phenomenon happened. The first one is that us being socialists, leftists, make us be a little bit weak in the punishing of drug and crime, because we had this idea that the idea of many of us has in the left that the crime, the criminal is the consequence of the society. You know what I mean? But I believe that affects us a little bit. But also, between 2013 and 2008, 19 or 20, the capacities of the state were diminished extremely in an extreme way by the economic crisis, by U.S. sanctions, and that also affected the capacity of the state to target and to neutralize and to eradicate these criminal gangs. But as Ahili said, around 2021-22, when the economic situation of Venezuela began to improve a little bit, the state showed again his capacity to combat and fight these criminal gangs, and that's when all these criminal gangs in Venezuela were dismantled, basically. Of course, migration also helped a little bit, maybe, in this phenomenon. And last year, the crime rate in Venezuela was 3 homicides out of 100,000 people, when the average for the region is 16, I believe. And if you want to compare with the worst case in Ecuador, that same rate, that same indicator is 76 or something, 76 homicides for every 100,000 people. So the level of security in recent years of Venezuela is noticeable. And I'm talking for the last at least 4 or 5 years. So yes, it was an issue, but we have been dealing with that the best we can, and right now it's doing better than ever, if you ask me.
100%.
And we have received an influx of returning migrants, and I believe that many of those returning migrants, not many, but some of them might, be part of criminal gangs or whatever, and that haven't affected the determination of the Venezuelan state in eradicating those bans. You hear news, local news every time here in Venezuela about how, authorities have been neutralizing this gun here, the other gun there, and the biggest headache, if you ask me, is the Tren del Llano that Sahili mentioned. And the government last year made a big achievement to try to dismantle that organization also.
Yeah, I would say, from my understanding, it has been a quote unquote tough on violent crime approach, but also, I can't dismiss something we've talked about, Jesus, is that, the level of consciousness is probably at the highest that we've seen, in the last 100 years in Venezuela. It's like, I just love seeing some of these interviews and people at the rallies. It's like the Venezuelan people,
Sorry to interrupt you. Did you see that woman that said to Diosdado Cabello last week
with the hat
with the hat that he had to change his face of, I don't know the word that she used, but that he was pissed off, and she told him, you have to change that face. You have to show a smile to the people because you are the leader. But she used, he cursed him. Yes.
But this is what I'm talking about.
It's happy by that woman, telling him that.
Yeah, it's like, I'm dying to visit because, again, just the images that I'm able to have access to. It's just you're seeing people be transformed through this revolution. You've been living under revolution now for 25 years or so, and it's like, and it's reflective, it's representative in all of society. You could see it. And it's it's that's another thing I really wish people out here in the West understood, that this struggle, there's the struggle within the struggle, but you have people there who have literally been transformed through this process. And like you mentioned before, people don't want to acknowledge that Chavismo is a real thing, and it's the most powerful political force in the country. And like we can't deny that. Even Trump basically is acknowledging that. They've asked him a bunch of times about Maria Corina Machado, and he said they don't respect her. They don't respect her. So how is it that they stole the elections? How is it that the Chavistas stole the elections from Edmundo Gonzalez, and you can't put Maria Corina Machado in place? You can't put her as your puppet president. How is that possible if everybody hates Chavismo, if there's a dictatorship, It doesn't.
Far right supporters in Venezuela are devastated by that. Our far right wingers went to cry because of what Trump said about Machado, because they had this big expectation about her becoming the transition president or whatever they want to name it.
But like
Sorry
Saheli
for
said,
interrupting.
no, you're fine. But that, like Saheli said, that there are points where Trump is just brutally honest, and this is where he's brutally honest. He's saying she doesn't have the respect, but he said it. He doesn't
It's
have
a
the respect.
fabrication. She always has been a fabrication. I mean, she even among far-right Venezuelans, she always was seen as an extremist. The traditional far-right Venezuelan political parties always keep her away until 2023, when they invented this opposition primary elections, and they tried to present her like the big newcomer, which is a big lie because she's not a newcomer. But yes, I mean, she's a person that doesn't have the capacity to move people in Venezuela, to convince people in Venezuela. I'm talking about the population because far right, Venezuelan escuálidos, immediately after the press conference of President Trump, they began to say that try to interpret what Trump said, and they say that what Trump meant was that she didn't have support in the military. And then last week or the other day, Trump reiterated, his position, even though Machado gave him her Nobel Peace Prize. Which she saw that might change his mind. So it's evident that she doesn't have any support. And all these arguments about Maduro stealing the elections in 2024 are another lie, because also right-wingers in Venezuela have always claimed fraud when Chavismo win elections in Venezuela since Hugo Chavez's time. So it's a stupidity.
I mean, we've talked about it on air before, the referendum that Chavez, I always forget the year. He admitted that, like he conceded rather that night, within hours, that, hey, compañeros, we didn't win, we didn't win tonight. You have elected members of the opposition in the National Assembly. I mean, they make up these things, and no one, again, especially out here in the West, all you have to do is just keep repeating the lie over and over, and it becomes the truth. It doesn't matter what the truth really is. People just keep repeating the lie over and over. We covered a lot. Carlito, do you have any final questions for the brother Jesus over here?
I put a few things that we might have left out of the initial, conversation.
Yeah,
in
Carlito's
the chat,
frozen. I don't know what happened to Carlito. He's frozen on the screen.
Oh, yes, that's true. Maybe he lost connection.
Yeah.
But I put in the chat that a few things that we discussed that might be important. Go ahead. You can read it.
Okay. Hold on. Let me see.
The response, the responding the strategy of Delcy, the Chavistas cabinet shakeup.
Yeah. So let's talk about it. I mean, we can do this. So let's talk about the response and the strategy of Delcy and the Chavistas. And this is really important. Again, this is really important for people to understand. And the reason why it's important is because, again, there's all this fake news out there, and there's a lot of misconceptions about what's happening. People are very confused. I'm not confused. The Chavistas are not confused. The Venezuelan people are not confused. But somehow there's a lot of confusion out here in the West. So let's unconfuse people.
That's true. Let's try to do that. It's complicated because people, always, especially the ones that you are back, Carlitos. Welcome.
I just wanted to mention Gary Webb. When we talk about the hypocrisy of Venezuela being a supplier of drugs into the United States, it's important for us to go back to history. Gary Webb was, for those who don't know, he was a journalist, an American journalist. And he uncovered that the CIA was the one who was doing the funneling of drugs into the country, into the United States. And the money that was gained from the distribution of heroin and cocaine, it was used to financed the Contras in Nicaragua. You know, and what that reveals. And by the way, he was found dead, supposedly from a suicide. But you don't commit suicide and shoot yourself twice in the head. Okay, that's like virtually impossible. You know, so he was assassinated by the CIA for exposing what had happened. I find it necessary to mention that, because of all this talk in the past few months about Venezuela being the drug kingpin in Latin America, killing American citizens and so forth, when the drugs have always been here, and people in the communities, the most oppressed communities, where drugs are a factor of life, have always questioned who brings it in, because Black and Latino people do not have the resources to establish and maintain the infrastructure of drug peddling. Okay, and that is something that's too sophisticated for the common people to be having any involvement in. I guess my question would be is, because I like Victor, I share the sentiments and the hopes for the Bolivarian revolution to survive and thrive. How can I put this? Y'all are not going to let that happen again, I hope.
Yes. We hope that doesn't happen. And if that happens, we need to be better prepared and better, and to be a better response if they try to do that again. If we can, of course, I mean, it's also extremely important to realize that the U.S. power is unmatched. The U.S. can do whatever they want, whenever they want, because they have the military technological capacity to do so.
But I have to also respond to that comment that you just made. Yes. They're not invincible.
Of course.
They are not invincible.
But we are ready.
Yes, and I have to recall something that Fidel Castro said. He said that the U.S. rulers, they don't respect the opinions of people in the third world. However, they are very fearful of the people in the United States, because they know that the people in the United States are not docile the way they are projected. They have a revolutionary history. Let's not forget where May Day was born. Let's not forget that, who the Black Panther Party, who the Young Lords were. They were afraid of that movement. And that's the reason why they did what they did to Gary Webb. They killed many. Okay. And so Venezuela has a major ally in the world, and that is the U.S. working class. Yes, and I always tell people that the best act of solidarity that we can render the Bolivarian revolution in Venezuela is to weaken the rulers in the United States.
Absolutely.
That's because Donald Trump is really not an expression of strength. He's an expression of weakness in American capitalism. And once revolutionaries in the United States understand that, it helps us understand what is our obligation to the Bolivarian revolution, to the Cuban revolution, to the Palestinian people, and so forth and so on. We're in a decisive position, as Che Guevara observed and actually articulated.
Yes, I believe from what you said, it's important to highlight that that is true that what everything. I mean, this hypocrisy from the U.S. When they talk about drugs, not only because the history of support of the U.S. to drugs everywhere, like the Contras or like COINTERPRO, delivering drugs in black communities in the U.S. in the 70s or the 80s, and all those things that we know that happened, the support of several U.S. presidents to the Colombian drug cartels with this alleged war on drugs that never happened, and that never had any success. And actually, since the U.S. began with the wars on drugs in Colombia, the production of cocaine has only increased. And it was only with the government of President Petro that trend has been changing a little bit, but it's still there. That monster is still there. So is the hypocrisy of the U.S. Talking about drugs and also not looking at the U.S. as the main washing machine for money laundering in the world, and that's not an speculation or an opinion. That has been certified by international organizations, and also the lack of act within the U.S. to try to fight the cartels of drugs that operates in the U.S. because that drugs do not distribute itself in the U.S. There are cartels of drugs in the U.S. that manage that business too, and the U.S. government seems not to be doing anything about that or doing anything about trying to fight the drug health issue with campaigns, with something that you notice that is actually like a comprehensive approach to try to educate, to change the perception about drugs. You don't see those things in the U.S. So that's part of the hypocrisy. And going back to the question about the defense, yes, we don't know Venezuela to be attacked, and we are ready, as we said, to defend the country. Of course, I was mentioning the reference to the U.S. capacities because they are able to strike whomever they want, whenever they want, because they have the missiles strikes, and you cannot do anything about that. But if they dare to put foot on the ground in Venezuela, they will receive the response of the Venezuelan people because we are here ready to give our life to defend our country. I mean, that's not. I mean, I was told since this craziness began by my wife and my daughter that live in Spain to exit Venezuela. To go to Spain and be secure in Spain. I didn't want to do that. And like me, I'm sure that many other millions of Venezuelans will do the same in order to defend the country. And we knew that something was going to happen. But anyway, it happened. And we need to live with we need to try to find the mistakes that we commit in the defense of President Maduro and in the defense of Caracas, and I hope that we will be better prepared if there are coming attacks that I believe might happen, because the U.S. eventually, despite all the narratives, all the stories that they create in Washington, they will crash with Chavismo again. And at that moment, they will try to do something similar or worse to what they did against us on January 3rd. So that's a fact, and we will try to repel that attack.
So, Jesus, you were, I think, so before we were going to talk about the response and the strategy of Delcy and the Chavistas. So you just mentioned that right there, which is part of it. Immediately thereafter, los colectivos were activated. The whole country was pretty much on standby, if you will, waiting to take orders just in case, because especially during that first week, it was a very hectic week. Yes. And there were a lot of suspicions that, is the second wave coming now? Is it coming today? Is it coming now? And so there was like a whole defensive thing that was, happening during that first week, which is still part of it. But talk about the rest of the response and the strategy of Chavismo.
Yes. I mean, we have mentioned already, the massive Chavista mobilization is part of the response, a very important one. And there has been massive Chavista demonstrations, not only in Caracas, but all over the countries, and almost every single day. I believe that this week is a week that we have seen less of those mobilizations, because people also need to, work, and you need to stop a little bit that. But at least last week there were like 3 or 4 big demonstrations in Caracas alone. So that's an important thing. Another important thing, I believe, is that the Venezuelan government has been extremely clear about not being directed by Washington or the White House. I mean, Delcy Rodríguez has been saying that a lot. I mean, she has been saying that we are will, and it's important also to understand that it is a fact that we have a gun pointed in our head. Not Delcy Rodríguez, the whole Venezuelan state has a U.S. sea carrier pointed in us, threatening us and pushing us and coercing us to do what they want. And despite that, Delcy Rodríguez has been clearly stating that we are free to do any sort of oil deals with China and Russia, for example. Several oil tankers has been seized by the U.S. military on its way to Cuba in recent days. And that says a lot about our resolve on not abandoning Cuba. But also it says a lot about the U.S. not controlling Venezuela, because if they actually control Venezuela, we wouldn't have been sending, oils that they eventually will seize and rob in the high seas, as they have been doing since December. So I believe that those are the most important things that has been happening. And of course, the narrative that the CIA is trying to impose is that the CIA director visited Caracas. That we what is the other one? I don't remember, but that there are several. I wrote some of them. The resume of the diplomatic relations, that we are selling oil only to the U.S., the reform of the hydrocarbon law, a possible visit of Delcy Rodríguez to the U.S. Those things has been dropped in many occasions by these CIA puppets to try to portray the Chavista leadership like a puppet of Washington, which is an extremely big lie. But those things have happened, and no one can deny that. And it's important for people to understand that. I mean, Delcy Rodríguez and the Chavista leadership are doing a balancing act to try to keep Chavismo alive while keeping the integrity of Venezuela as a nation also alive, and dealing with the pressure from the U.S. that they are. We cannot be in that level of how do you say that? Naivety. Being extremely naive to believe that the U.S. is not putting incredible pressure on Venezuela after this attack. Those things should be there. We don't see them, but we feel that in the air. You know what I mean? And the government of Venezuela is trying to deal with all those things, keeping the country running, keeping the economy moving on, trying to, present a goose face in front of the people that invaded your country and kidnapped your president, but at the same time demanding the return of the president and his wife, letting the world know that we are willing to do business with other countries, and we are allies in the region. So, I mean, when you see the statements coming out of Caracas, of Miraflores, you immediately notice that we have been trying to keep the Chavista orientation in everything that we have been doing. But of course, we reach. Go ahead, Carlito.
Jesus, I want to ask you. You alluded to it. I guess I'd like to know some more. What legal pursuits is the Venezuelan government taking to secure the freedom of President Maduro and la compañera Cilia?
Yes, I believe that the most important one is the launching of this Bring Them Back campaign that was launched internationally. I believe that last week or 2 weeks ago. So I believe that that's the most important one. I'm not saying that the legal battle is not important. Actually, the Venezuelan government hired this extremely famous lawyer that defended Julian Assange, and that is the legal the lawyer of President Maduro in the U.S. And I'm pretty sure that those guys know a little bit about how, especially with the experience of Assange, how the states and the apparatus of the capitalist state works to destroy a person. So that's another important move. I don't remember the name of the lawyer, but he's a famous lawyer that a lot of people talk about when he was in the hearing of President Maduro the same date of the U.S. attack. So the Venezuelan government didn't stop in trying to find the best legal team to defend President Maduro. It's important also to say that President Maduro, this is the first time, and I believe that that's the core of the legal defense. This is the first time in history that a sitting president of a country, a head of state, has been kidnapped. A lot of people talk about Noriega, but Noriega was not the sitting head of state of Panama. He was the head of the military junta or whatever, but he didn't have the protection of the presidential immunity that most head of states have. And one important, some people might believe, well, the U.S. do not care about international law and that immunity, but the reality is that the U.S. recognized in its legal internal framework that immunity also. And some people might say, okay, maybe they recognize that immunity in the U.S. legal system, but the U.S. do not recognize the 2018 presidential elections, which might be an excuse that the U.S. might use to try to discredit that also trend, that narrative, that explanation. And even in that case, that narrative is not strong enough, because they are accusing, if you read the indictment document, they are accusing Maduro of drug dealings in France in 2005, drug dealings in other countries in 2012 or 2013. And one important thing to notice is that President Maduro was recognized by the U.S. from 2013 until 2018. So there will be a lot of complications for the U.S. to try to bypass this issue about the immunity of a sitting head of state. But we know that they will do everything they want, because this is just a show to try to. So for that reason, I believe that the most important thing that we need to do and push for is to change public opinion and launch this massive campaign of to try to bring them back, the way we brought back Alex Saab a few years ago. That was a Venezuelan politician that was kidnapped by the U.S. And taken to a jail in Florida for several years.
Has the campaign included approaching the Vatican? I know that for the Cuban Five, yes, the Vatican was approached.
Yes, I'm not sure. I don't expect too much from the Vatican, but yes, it's true that in the case of the Cuban, especially because they actually made a statement about the kidnapping of President Maduro, that they were trying to negotiate the exit of Maduro. before the incident, which is an stupidity. They cannot negotiate the exit of Maduro. But anyway, maybe that happened. Maybe the Vatican can be used to try to put some also additional pressure to that. And I'm pretty sure that also there will be diplomatic pressure from other countries in the region. Actually, Lula, and I'm not a fan of Lula, but Lula said a few things yesterday about President Maduro not believing the fact that President Maduro is in a jail. Something like that he said yesterday. So I hope that make a change a little bit. You had another question there, Victor, about the cabinet shake-up. I believe that is important. Delcy Rodriguez has been making a few changes in her cabinet. I don't see those changes like radical changes. I believe that they are operational changes, and I know that she have a strong character, and maybe she didn't have good chemistry with a few ministers there, and she's just trying to have persons that she trusts and people that are capable with good credentials. And I believe that those people that she have appointed are people that might, improve a few things, especially in the communication. He named a new minister for information and communication, which I believe is important, an important position, especially at these times. And I didn't saw the last minister like too active or doing too much. So I believe that decision was important. Also, the appointment of the guy that is now the head of the presidential office, that was this security detail of President Maduro for several years, and now is in. So I believe that that's important because it's like the recognition of the presence of President Maduro in the cabinet, and all those people are people that has been always around Chavista. She's not bringing newcomers or far right people or liberals to her government. Those are hardcore Chavistas that has been there for years.
Son cuadros.
Sí, exactly. At least most of them. I don't know all of them. But so that's my impression. She's not making like a shake of the cabinet or something like that. It's going to destroy whatever was being done before the kidnapping of Maduro. So I believe that she's just trying to put the people that she trusts the most and more capable people maybe in key positions. And the most important changes, she didn't do that herself, but were these changes that were announced last week of the head of the military commanders in several regions and military bases in the country. And that was important. And I believe that was necessary, especially taking into consideration what we have been talking about, the flaws of our defense during these U.S. strikes. So I believe that, this is a first step to try to find the clues about what really happened in terms of the military defense of the U.S. without falling into the trap, and I talk about those things, trying to avoid falling into the trap of this weird narrative about treason or betrayal or whatever, which are just CIA,
fake news stuff.
Stuff.
Yeah. And then lastly, can you briefly, and then we're almost at the 2-hour mark, so I think we'll end it here with the last question. I don't think it's getting a lot of coverage over here in the United States, but I've been trying to follow as much as I can the hydrocarbon reform laws. And I know this is a big conversation. They've met, she's met, I think Delcy and her brother have met with the PDVSA workers, the president of the union. They're talking to the National Assembly. They're talking to the legislators. They're talking to the, regular people, the people of Venezuela. My understanding is they're getting a lot of input from a lot of different places, and that's intentional. That's on purpose, so we can get input on these laws. What can you tell us about these hydrocarbon reform laws?
Yes, I'm not an expert, but from what I've read and what we have been translating from people that are knowledgeable, we have been publishing like 2 or 3 already pieces, good pieces like Misión Verdad about this issue. And I've been learning by translating those pieces. Some of the things that I'm going to tell you, first of all, some far-right politicians and personalities in Venezuela has been claiming that it's a unconstitutional law, which is a big lie. the law do not change the spirit of the Constitution, because the spirit of the Constitution is made about hydrocarbons, about oil, is focused mostly on the ownership of the operation. And in this reform, the ownership of the operation will not change. I mean, we won't allow foreign or local corporations that want to join the oil business to have a majority stake in the joint ventures that are usually created for oil operations in Venezuela, with local or with international corporations. That won't be changed, and that has been endlessly explained by the Venezuelan government in these days, especially after the first discussion of the law of the reform was passed by the National Assembly. What they are saying that is going to be changed is the royalties, for example. Some levels, I believe that we had the royalty level at around 30%. Or something like that. And right now, they are talking that in some cases, upon evaluation, especially in what they call, the specialists call green fields, which are these oil rigs that are not exploded because there's no infrastructure there. But people, we know that there is oil there. So in those green fields, if the evaluation says that it requires more investment, the royalties might be reduced to something between 15 and 20%, for example. But that will need an evaluation of every case. The main idea behind this change is to try to attract international investors to explore oil in those areas that has not been exploited for several decades. So that's one of the ideas. Another important change introduced in this reform that has not been approved yet by the National Assembly needs to pass through this consultation process. That is the one that you are mentioning, Victor. And then it will be voted after incorporating all the suggestions and that can be incorporated by this consultation. And one of those changes is related to who control the commercialization, the trade, the exporting of the oil. And that is extremely important, especially because the US sanctions forbid PDVSA to do international transactions of oil. And for that reason, they use it as an excuse for this alleged ghost fleet and whatever, and seizing of oil tankers of Venezuela. But if we allowed foreign corporations to come here and have a say in the commercialization, they will be able to export this oil without the possibility of being falling into the sanctions that are over PDVSA, that are hanging over PDVSA at this moment. So there's the way I see it, and again, I'm not an expert from what I've been reading in recent days. The point is to try to improve production, evade somehow U.S. sanctions, and I believe that will help us, if you ask me. And it's important also to say that despite all the bad things that have happened, and despite most Venezuelans knowing that our recent year economic stress is the result of U.S. sanctions, some people in Venezuela are optimistic because of what has been happening in terms of the economy. Actually, the U.S. has been easing a few sanctions in recent days, and they say that they will ease another one because they cannot do business themselves with the crazy framework of sanctions that they are imposing against PDVSA. So
they're going to have to ease.
That we will see more U.S. oil corporations in the Venezuelan business, but it's important to clarify that means capitulation. I mean, actually, Venezuela never expelled those U.S. companies. It was actually U.S. sanctions, the ones that actually forced most of those corporations to exit Venezuela, and that was clearly stated in that meeting that Trump had with those oil executive oligarchs a few
when he asked ExxonMobil, when did you leave? And he said, we left when you sanctioned them.
Exactly. And they say
when you
ExxonMobil that's something that was said by Halliburton, but ExxonMobil said that they won't invest in Venezuela because the conditions are not secure and there needs to be legal reforms in place. So they basically acknowledged that Trump was not in control of Venezuela, and they were actually somehow demanding for more aggressive, actions by Washington.
Right.
And ExxonMobil is a declared enemy of Venezuela, especially after they left Venezuela in 2007 or 2008 because they didn't want to agree with the conditions that were imposed by President Chavez at the time. So since that moment, Chevron and I forget always the name of not Chevron, Exxon, and another oil company, I don't remember the name, has been swear enemies of Venezuela, and they actually initiated lawsuits against Venezuela and everything to try to get compensated. So that's basically it.
Real quick, I have some notes here from Saheli about the hydrocarbon reform. Because I asked her, and I had somewhat of an understanding. I hear the cute talking points, which at the end of the day, Dulcie is still a politician, Jorge is still a politician, and they make good talking points that, look, we need to increase production. Dulcie says...
and Dulcie it's important to say that Dulcie was head of PDVSA for the last years also.
Yeah.
She knows what she's talking about.
Yeah. And she said, they're both saying it, the oil is no good to us underground. No good to us underground. And we have to convert that oil into Venezuelan prosperity. That means building hospitals, building schools, building roads, building bridges, so on and so forth, building the infrastructure, basically providing for the needs of the people, increasing the workers, the union workers at PDVSA. That's also a priority. So, but none of that happens if we don't produce oil. So what good is it to have the world's largest oil reserve if we're not producing oil? We should be and again, I'm paraphrasing what Dulcie and Jorge have been saying, but go back to Saheli's point over here. When I asked her about it, she said, well, first of all, as you mentioned, Jesus, the original law is not changing. PDVSA will have a majority shareholding. The joint ventures mechanism will remain. The state remains the owner of the resources. The only amendment is the integration of the like what you just mentioned, the anti-blockade law. That Venezuela cannot access international funding or loans or credit lines due to the U.S. blockade. So it has to depend on direct investments, domestic or foreign, and oil activities becoming a money-intensive activity. New technologies are not cheap. So through the anti-blockade law, investments are insured at times, but the legal mechanism now is confusing and it's all over the place.
Yes, and that's important because let me interrupt you there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because most of the changes that are proposed in this reform are taken by the anti-blockade law and the operational agreements that were designed based on the anti-blockade law. And the anti-blockade law was approved like 4 or 5 years ago, especially to try to bypass the U.S. sanctions. So that's part of the discussion. The government is trying to implement something that has been already used and has been successful because the Venezuelan oil production has been increasing slowly but steady for the last 4 or 5 years, and what the government is trying to do is to make it more transparent because it's going to be in the reform. Many of the things that has been done under the anti-blockade law are not transparent because that law was designed for that, because we were being attacked. We actually are being also still attacked by the U.S. But many of the mechanisms were not of the public domain because we need to keep a lot of information in the hide in order to avoid additional sanctions by the U.S., additional ways to asphyxiate our economy, which is what the U.S. has been trying to do for almost a decade. And we have been resisting despite that. And it's amazing when you see what has been happening for the last decade in Venezuela, when you see these strikes And when you see the resolve of the Venezuelan people, that despite this terrible U.S. military attack and the kidnapping of our president, we are here standing and willing to keep defending our country and keep pushing Chavismo forward. You say, wow, that's amazing. I haven't seen something like that in other countries. And let me tell you that I try to read a lot of history, you know, and monitor whatever happened in other countries around the world all the time, and this is really unprecedented, and we also need to be proud of ourselves. I mean the Chavista people, and also our supporters, our compas like you and Carlitos, and many others out there that are, you know, supported in solidarity with us, because what he has been doing is amazing. And we will venceremos. Yes.
If people don't understand what I'm doing, this has become the universal symbol right here.
Yes.
You know, for a couple things to free Maduro. Maduro had the wherewithal, as he's you know, as they're giving him his little quote unquote perp walk, to look at the camera and go like he went like this, and then he went like this.
He was basically saying, "Nosotros venceremos."
Venceremos. Venceremos, absolutely. And it's also remember, it's also the peace sign. And, you know, he had the song, you know, that he was dancing to all the way to the end, you know, no crazy war, peace, you know, calling for peace.
And that's an important point, you know, because a lot of people were claiming that there was this video spread on social media in which they claim that Maduro was like envalentonado, telling the gringos, come and get me, something like that. And that video ended up being a fake video, because it was those statements that Maduro made several months ago were intended to the far-right Venezuelan opposition, to Edmundo Gonzalez and all those guys that were trying to oust Maduro after the 2024 elections. But they twisted that video in order to make it look like Maduro was defiant and inviting the gringos to come and get him, when in reality he was just telling the right-wingers in Venezuela to go come and get him. So it's important to remember how many times Maduro went out to talk about peace, to say that Venezuela didn't want a war, that there were actually songs that became trendy because of that, you know, and it's important to rescue that, because they has been trying to say that Maduro demanded this to happen, you know.
It's part of the psychological operations that's going on. I was about to say, you're speaking to the fake news again. I remember the day of, I was literally having arguments, like real arguments. And I took this whole thing very personal. It just affected me viscerally. And I got into arguments with people because there were old videos of old demonstrations, or videos of Venezuelans in Spain or New Jersey or New York or Florida, and people were putting it out there saying the Venezuelans are celebrating this. And I got into huge fights with my friends, and I would say, "What's your source? Why do I?" And so it came back. So then they would send me the actual video, and I would have to say to them, "That's old." And then I had to go and point to other videos.
And there were some fake, artificial intelligence videos that were also spread at that moment too.
Oh, that's in Queens, New York.
Yes,
but the brother John Jeter, who's not here tonight to defend himself because he made some wild claims. We have to fight against those things. And if you're a leftist, if you're a so-called leftist, I always use that term because I don't know what left is anymore out here. But if you're a socialist, if you're a progressive, it is not your job to be putting out conspiracy theories, false claims, unsubstantiated, uncorroborated claims and just putting it out there into the world, because we have enough of that already. That's confusing a lot of people.
The problem in the U.S. is that's one of the most important problems in the U.S. left, is that they are invaded by liberals that are not really leftist people or even socialists. So sorry for
Well,
interrupting you.
the imperialist ideology is the strongest inside of the most advanced capitalist country in the world, and that's in the United States. And the movement is not free of the ideology of imperialism. You know, now I do have faith. I do have faith that this is going to spill over and the truth is going to come out. And the reason why is because there are like a million different opinions about what's happening in Venezuela. Okay? There's like a million different opinions. And 99% of those opinions are reflective of the propaganda being put out by the CIA.
That's true.
You know, but what's important for us to understand, and this is what I have my complete faith in, is that when something doesn't work, it doesn't work, and when something works, it eventually proves to work because it works. You know, yes. and that's the way truth is. You know, truth belongs to no one. It doesn't belong to anyone. The truth. It's a phenomenon that operates on its own. It's got a life of its own. And irrespective of how you try to manage the truth, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's that simple, you know. Yes. And so I have a lot of faith in the success of the Venezuelan people, because it's like the case of Gary Webb that I mentioned before. When people are educated about the case of Gary Webb, it's easy for them to understand how the accusations made against President Maduro are total bullshit. Okay? You know, there's no way, you know, because the United States has the biggest criminal record in history, you know, and it's something you cannot refute. You know, they gave alcohol to the Native Americans to get them drunk to take their lands. Okay, they did the same thing with African people. You know that is the name. They conquer us in many ways. They conquer us with drugs, and they conquer us, you know, by taking what belongs to us. You know,
Listen, but I believe that is extremely important what you said, especially because even with all these lies spread about President Maduro before and after, and about Chavismo before and after the strikes, the U.S. strikes, we saw, and that is important for us, here in Venezuela, a massive protest, a lot of people going outside, and that says a lot about what you were just saying, Carlito. I mean, even with all this mix of fake news, lies, and twisted reality, people recognize that something wrong was happening. And for that reason, I believe that many people, and we need to take advantage of that to try to push for the liberation of the presidential couple of Venezuela, and you know, via this, you know, campaign, bring them back. So I believe that we need to do that, and we need to find, and I have been saying that for several months already, we need to try to find another ways, more creative ways to try to protest, especially aiming at the ones that are running the show, that are the oligarchs, the corporations. So for that reason, I believe that campaigns like boycotts, like BES and sanctions, they're similar to the ones that has been used in Palestine. I believe that some people might try to. I mean, I believe that it might be important if people in the U.S. do something like that against corporations that are clearly involved in the attacks against Venezuela. For example, ExxonMobil, for example, or, you know, this Parampil IE company that has been involved in this operation, and many others. I mean, there are endless corporations that wants to destroy the Bolivarian revolution. But anyway, I just wanted to add that.
So Victor, I'd like to make an announcement about something that's happening next Saturday.
Sure.
Next Saturday, on the 31st of January, there's going to be a major demonstration here in New York City on Times Square at 2:00, and that is demanding the freedom of President Maduro and la compañera Cilia. So it's next Saturday at 2:00 in Times Square, 42nd Street, Broadway, and 7th Avenue. This is supposed to be a major mobilization to demand hands off Venezuela and free the two Venezuelan heroes.
It's a great way to end the program. We actually endorsed that action and over here at ANTICONQUISTA. And I'm going to end the program with this. The Chavistas are not confused. The Venezuelan people are not confused. The only ones who are confused are us out here. We need to unconfuse ourselves. And I believe one of sorry to bring this brother back up again, brother's name back up again, but I believe one of the talking points that John Jeter was going to use, because I read what he wrote, is that some leftists out here have become talking mouthpieces for the Chavista government. And if he were to dare to accuse me of that, I am guilty as charged. And so I tell people all the time, I've been saying this for a very long time, I don't take my cues from folks out here in the United States. I take my cues from the Fidelistas in Cuba, from the Chavistas in Venezuela, from the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. We should try to see what they've done over there. And again, it's not, we can't apply what they've done over there that's over here, but we should be learning from them. We should be learning from them. And so I see a people that's resolute. I see a people that's steadfast. I see a people speaking with one voice. And we need to follow that. And so let's
venceremos, compa.
And, venceremos,
compa. Un abrazo.